Nice little reminder of Martin Bakole versus Jared Anderson. Thank you to the zone for letting me use that. Before I proceed to talk more about Martin Bakole, have a look there on screen. Tyson Fury Alexander Usyk 2 until the 4th of December with the link that's pinned in the comment section. That link that's pinned in the comment section is a link to obviously purchase the pay-per-view for Tyson Fury Alexander Usyk 2. If you purchase it and you're based in the UK before the 4th of December, you will actually automatically, and that's through the G-Man link, be put into a competition, put into a draw for the competition. VIP package, including flights, accommodation, and tickets for two. The Tyson Fury Alexander Usyk 2, the rematch. That is just before Christmas. That's a hell of an early Christmas present, if I do say so myself. But let's talk more about a man who many people are dubbing the heir apparent to the heavyweight throne, and that is, of course, the man on screen, Martin Bakole. Martin Bakole came onto the scene I think I first really started hearing about him when he fought a guy, I think his name was DL Jones or something like that. And the only reason how I knew it was DL Jones because Daniel Dubois had faced him prior. And, at that time in Daniel Dubois' career, I think he'd only just maybe turned 20 years old. There was, a lot of people saying, how good is he? Is he this? Is he that? And there was a lot of ifs about Daniel Dubois. With Martin Bakole, there was a lot more people singing his praises. Again, at the time, he was still fairly unproven. But a lot more people seen a little bit more potential in Bakole than they did in Daniel Dubois. Obviously, goes without saying he was a much older man. Martin Bakole, in terms of years, I think he was still in his 20s. But Daniel Dubois, going from a teenager into his early 20s, Bakole was well there. So a lot of people were, high on Bakole. And his first real test came in October of 2018. It was in the York Hall. I think it was on Channel 5. And it was against Michael Hunter. Now, on paper, that was a bit of a kind of, wow, that's out of the blue, because Michael Hunter primarily campaigned the cruiserweight. He was known for giving Alexander Usyk early on in their respective fight a very, very tough time. He'd been kind of inactive even going into the Usyk fight and then post the Alexander Usyk fight. But in the ring, and I believe that was a 10-rounder, you'd never have known. He looked at home at heavyweight. He landed very frequently on Bakole. Bakole was never down in that fight, but it was apparent that he had an injury and, wanted to quit at times in that fight. So that was a bit of a red flag, and ultimately he was stopped in the 10th round. He was never in with a sniff of ever getting a nod in that fight. He was well and truly beaten. And I think a lot of the kind of hype went off Martin Bakole. We still knew he was a decent fighter, but as Michael Hunter progressed in his run of heavyweight, going in there against the likes of Sergei Kuzmin, Alexander Povetkin, people like that, it actually made that loss not look as bad in retrospect, because you're looking at a very, very good fighter, at least he was in his prime, Michael Hunter. And you kind of thought, okay, maybe that was just really poor matchmaking, too much too soon. A bit like Jared Anderson when he went in there with Bakole, very similar. You could have looked at it and said a bit too much too soon. Bakole, then he started, making some noise. He was with Matchroom for a while, and he was doing a few things. I remember actually at one stage when, I don't want to say he was out in the wilderness, not necessarily, but after the Hunter loss, I think his comeback fight, or one of his comeback fights, was against Mariusz Wach in Poland. It's a very kind of out there kind of fight. Now, he won that fight via stoppage, 9th round, I think it was. But very kind of out there. A lot of people weren't talking about him. Then he signs up with Boxer, and the first real kind of look we get at him, those who have already seen, we knew what he looked like, but he went away. He's obviously been trained by Billy Nelson, I would imagine, if not the whole of his career, at least the majority, up in Scotland. He came in against Carlos Takam October last year. That was on the Fury Ngannou undercard, and as near as makes no difference, 300 pounds. I think he was 299 and a half thereabouts. And I was thinking, okay, that weight, because Bakole earlier on in his career, I think he was as light as maybe even in the 240s. So you kind of look at that and think, okay, it's not going to help your mobility. You seem to have power, but, Carlos Takam is tough. He's durable. If you can't go the rounds and you're getting hit, because Carlos Takam, at that point, was coming off the back of a loss to Joe Joyce, I think the previous year, in a fight in which he gave as good as he got, but he was ultimately worn down by Joe Joyce. And then a win, I think it was after the Joe Joyce fight, he beat Tony Oka, and it was a comprehensive win. It might not say that on the scorecards, but it was comprehensive. So he was coming in off a good run of form, Carlos Takam. And to see Bakole just go through him like a hot knife goes through butter, or like like a hot knife, or a knife goes through hot butter, I should say. Really, that's the proper analogy. But you get what I mean. 3 rounds, Bakole looked in control. Never seen Takam that hurt, and that to me was almost. I want to say it was almost like that was too good. A fight that should have been tough on paper against a noted toughman in Carlos Takam. That's what he is. He gives everyone a tough night. He's never going to have an easy time with Carlos Takam, no matter who you are. For him to do that, we kind of stood up and took notes. And I think it put the heavyweight division on notice, but not in a good way. People looking at that thinking, well, you're with Ben Shalom, there's not a major promoter. You look like you're going to be a nightmare for anybody. And we don't want that. Because we're not going to get crazy money to go in there with Martin Bakole. It's a really, really high risk and very little reward. And we kind of didn't hear from Martin Bakole. And you got to bear in mind, you'd seen people like, no disrespect intended, Joseph Parker win very ugly and very boring fight on more of these Riyadh shows. You saw Martin Bakole look really good, devastating, and quite entertaining. And we're hearing nothing of him. Then all of a sudden, we had a show in America. We're meant to have Terence Crawford versus Madrimov, but we did have it as the main event. But we were also meant to have on the undercard Virgil Ortiz versus Tim Tszyu. Now that fight didn't happen because Tim Tszyu pulled out. He said the facial injuries he received from the Fundora fight hadn't properly healed yet, so he couldn't spar properly. Okay, fair enough. It left a hole on that card, left a gap. And they announced that Jared Big Baby Anderson, who is an American heavyweight prospect, would step up and go in there against Martin Bakole. Now, for me, I looked at that fight with like, oh crap. They are, they either think very highly of Jared Anderson, or they really don't understand matchmaking. And it turned out to be the latter. That really got a lot more people talking about Bakole. But if you look at Martin Bakole and you look at the way he approaches a fight, you look at his style, that style right there was always going to be a nightmare for someone like Jared Anderson. Poor defense that Anderson has. We don't know how hard he hits. He could hit very hard, and Bakole could just have a really, really good chin. We don't know. But wasn't able to put a dent in Bakole, really. And Bakole just, it was, in some ways you would say it was easy. Many people would look at that and say, on paper, it looked a mismatch, and in the ring, it was. It got a lot more people talking about Martin Bakole, and now he is on the verge of potentially fighting for a world title. Now he has been ordered to have a final eliminator against F.A. Ajagba. F.A. Ajagba, I think, is another fighter who is promoted by Top Rank, so he's going through Top Rank fighters. Now, that fight right there is a fight that I would make Martin Bakole absolutely firm favourite. F.A. Ajagba, certainly no question, hits a lot harder than Jared Anderson, but defensively he's not great. Technically he's a bit lacking, and whenever he's been hit hard, like it was against Frank Sanchez, and he was down in that fight, he's really gone into his shell. So I can see that fight being over pretty damn quick, or if it's not over, it might actually go a bit longer than the Anderson fight, because again he can go into a shell. But it's a Bakole win. And that puts Bakole in good stead to challenge potentially for a world title, or maybe pick up a vacant title if the winner of Fury Usyk vacates them. Who knows? This guy right here is one of these fighters who I think right now at heavyweight, and this is just my opinion, could be completely wrong, he could go in there against a Jagba and get blown out of the water, but I think Bakole potentially is the most dangerous heavyweight on the planet right now, in the world, on the planet, whatever way you want to say it. I think he is absolutely fantastic. I really, truly do. When I look at that style, I think that would give a fighter like Alexander Usyk, who there are a few heavyweights who I would really look at, even throughout the course of history, and say, I could give them a good chance of beating Alexander Usyk. Martin Bakole is one. I look at that style, that come forward, all pressure, like the weight is nothing, the heavy-handedness that Tyson Fury doesn't have, and his ability to dictate the pace against the mover. That right there could absolutely not just throw Alexander Usyk off his game plan, but it could cause him absolute fits. And I think that Alexander Usyk, say he was hypothetically to go and fight Martin, but say he beats Tyson Fury and fights Martin Bakole next year, would I pick him to win? I probably would, Alexander Usyk, But I would say that him against Bakole would be such a hard fight physically for Alexander Usyk, even to win, that it would probably finish his career. As in, to win that fight would take so much out of Alexander Usyk, more than probably both Fury fights, that I think it would be stick a fork in him at that point. And when I look at him against other heavyweights, I look at someone like an Anthony Joshua, even prior to his loss against Daniel Dubois, and I think, holy crap, that's a fight I wouldn't make if I was Eddie Hearn. And that's even before Anthony Joshua fought Daniel Dubois. I think that could go pear-shaped very, very quickly. I look at someone like an Adja Kabayel and I think, oh god, that could be rough goings. Someone like a Zhilei Zhang, he's got to have his wits about him very early on. But as the fight progresses, Bakole is not going to stop punching. He's going to hit Zhilei Zhang everywhere he can go, and Zhilei Zhang is going to slow it down. I look at that and I think, good lord, people like Dylan White who were talking about coming back, not a chance, not a prayer. Joseph Parker again is another one. I don't think he'd be able to keep Martin Bakole off him. I think Martin Bakole, when people say he's the heir apparent, I think they're onto something. When you look at some of his highlights, when you look at what he does in there, because it's not just brute force and ignorance. There's actually a good bit of sophistication. His short punches are very good. They're delivered very well. He's not just looking to hit all kinds of anything. He's setting some of those shots up very well. Martin Bakole is someone who, it's a weird one. When he was started coming up on the scene, people were talking about him, then they weren't, and now he's just shot into the stratosphere. And I think a lot of promoters, because you got to remember, Ben Shalom is kind of an outside promoter, even though he does work with the Saudis. In the world of boxing, he's still quite small time. Most of these promoters like Frank Warren, Eddie Hearn, Golden Boy, Al Heyman, Bob Arum, etc., it's not that they don't want to deal with Ben Shalom. I think that they look at their heavyweight stable and think, you've got the one missing piece, and we don't want your missing piece absolutely knocking our house of cards down. And I think that with Martin Bakole, there is a lot of heavyweights, and it's not just myself. Ade has mentioned it as well, that he rated Martin Bakole extremely highly, and I respect his opinion very much so on boxing, and I agree. I think that a mover will give him problems, and that might be the way to beat him, but you are going to have to be punch perfect for as good as 10 rounds, 12 rounds. It's going to take some beating to beat this guy. Martin Bakole is a dangerous heavyweight for any man. That's why I like watching him. That's why I'm looking forward to seeing what's going to happen in the new year with regards to Martin Bakole. If he fights a Jagba, that will put him in prime contention to fight Daniel Dubois if he beats Joseph Parker. That'll put him in prime contention to challenge for potentially a vacant title. And once he's a champion, or if he's put in a mandatory position, there's no way any of the champions can say, oh, I'm not fighting him. You're obliged to. So I look forward to 2025, because I think the most dangerous man in boxing is really he's really gonna show why many people, myself included, feel as though he is. But am I over praising him? You think I am? Let me know in the comments. What do you think about Martin Bakole? How do you think he'd fare against these heavyweights? Is there any you'd pick over him? Let me know in the comments. I hope you enjoyed it, people. Smash the like button if you could. Hit subscribe, of course, as always, if you haven't already. And until next time, people, I will leave it there. Peace.